Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. Before we get into this episode, Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to Bet Online today and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. All right. So, somewhat big news coming out of Baltimore, coming out of the Baltimore Orioles organization. Uh, the Orioles have signed Charlie Morton to a 1 year, $15 million deal. Now, what does this mean? What are the implications? Charlie Morton has a long, very impressive career. He's heading into his age 41 season. And so he is a veteran, and the Orioles are adding this sort of veteran presence to the rotation. He is likely to slot in probably to the number four spot in the rotation, given his age. Um, but he still might be an important piece, excuse me, of this Baltimore Orioles rotation going forward, potentially in the playoffs. So the Orioles hopefully, made a good signing here. I don't think anybody is too upset about it. I think it's sort of a situation where it's a low risk, but potentially could be a high reward sort of situation. Not that I think Charlie Morton is going to be a Cy Young candidate at this point in his career, but he could be an important piece for the Orioles heading into the playoffs, which I will get to soon. So, first of all, just a brief sort of rundown on Charlie Morton. He has, this upcoming season, he's already turned 41. So this upcoming season will be his age 41 season. He's been in Major League Baseball since 2008 when he was 24 years old. He did play for Atlanta very early in his career, but spent the bulk of his early career with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Spent a year with the Phillies, went to Houston, the Rays, Atlanta, and now he's coming. And he's been, it should be said, he was with Atlanta for several years, Houston and Tampa, just a couple. And now he is going to be an Oriole. So, especially as a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball, pitching for 16, about to be 17 years in Major League Baseball is very, very impressive. He's really, close to an elite starter. He's been an all-star a couple times. Uh, he's not quite, well, he's definitely not in like the Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer tier of pitchers. He might be a couple tiers below that. Um, but he's obviously a very, very good pitcher. You won't go to the Hall of Fame or anything like that, but he's been a very, very good pitcher for an extended period of time. And now he'll be an Oriole. So throughout his career, Charlie Morton has been a curveball specialist, and he has exceeded in getting the ground ball. Last year, for instance, he was in the 75th percentile in ground ball percentage, which is excellent. A lot of his other metrics are not as good as that. But overall, he's been a ground ball pitcher throughout his career, something that I think throughout the league is something, or that is more or less a quality that has become increasingly loved amongst organizations, keeping the ball inside the ballpark. There are effective fly ball pitchers, but I think most organizations, if given the preference between being a fly ball pitcher and a ground ball pitcher, would take a ground ball pitcher on average in general. And Charlie Morton is definitely that. So throughout his career, the other thing that's really important to note is that, especially over the last few seasons, which is surprising given his age, he has been great at eating innings. So throughout his career, I think 8 times he's thrown over 150 innings, which is really, really good for a starting pitcher. He's done pretty well avoiding injury throughout the course of his career. And in the last 4 years, his age 37 through 40 season, he's thrown 185, 172, 163, and 165 innings. And so hopefully, I think that the Orioles, part of the logic behind this signing is they are going to be getting a starting pitcher that is going to eat innings and at least throw 150 innings for the Orioles. That's at least what they're hoping for now. Obviously, it always has to be said there are no guarantees with that. But I think that's what the Orioles, in part, were hoping for with this signing. I think another thing that's really important that can't be dismissed about Charlie Morton or overlooked is his playoff experience. Now, his most recent playoff experience, probably, I think there are fans out there that remember for the Atlanta Braves, he did really, really poorly. He only threw 2 innings and gave up 3 earned runs and was pulled really early into his outing. But other than that, and prior to that one poor outing for Atlanta, he had done pretty well as far as like the playoffs go. I think that he was a guy at one point, more in his late career, because he really started, like I had said earlier, he spent a lot of his time with Pittsburgh, didn't really develop the playoff experience at that point in his career. But then he started going to these other teams that were making the playoffs, Houston, the Rays, and Atlanta. And he had really, really good performances while he was pitching in for those teams in the playoffs. For the Tampa Bay Rays, he threw 10 innings. This was in 2019. And he had a .9 ERA, so just giving up 1 earned run. For Houston, he did really well as well. He threw 23 innings. He had a 4.24 ERA in those postseason outings, but that was the 2017 team, so he was helpful in helping them to win a World Series. And he's had, this is sort of like looking at like compiled starts, but he's had some really, really big, important, and crucial playoff starts for a lot of the playoff teams as they were heading into the playoffs or as they were into the playoffs in 2021. He did pitch for Atlanta and did help them when they won the World Series through 16 innings and gave up only 6 earned runs over the course of those innings. So 16 and 2/3 to be technical. So this is a guy that has playoff experience, and I think this is a big motivating factor in why the Orioles decided to sign him to this deal. Now, I think that, there is going to be some question potentially over how effective he will be in the playoffs, just given this is his age 41 season. At the time of the playoffs, he will hopefully have thrown 150 to 170 innings, probably somewhere in that range. And when it gets to be playoffs, is he going to be the Charlie Morton that has showed up in the playoffs in the past, given his age and potentially given the fatigue that he will be feeling and experiencing when we get to that point in the season, as old as he's been. So that is sort of a big question that I think looms for the Orioles. But I think the Orioles are more than happy at this point to take that chance that he might be that player. If he's not, the Orioles will have a range of options that they will be able to do. They can put him in the bullpen and utilize his playoff experience in more situational matchups. Now, if he does end up going to the bullpen, I potentially see him either being like a starter, maybe throwing an inning or two, and then transitioning to another, maybe to get through the order, the top of the order one time, and then transitioning to whoever it may be for the Orioles in the playoffs, whether it's Povich or maybe a lefty like Povich that he gets paired with, or something along these lines. Like it's unclear. But there are like possibilities that if he is not going to be the Charlie Morton that the Orioles are hoping for, there are meaning he's going to be the guy that goes out there and gives 6 innings and 2 earned runs or something like that when we get to the playoffs. If he's not going to be that guy, the Orioles also have the option of, if it gets really bad, not including him on the playoff roster at all. Um, but there are other options of how you can maybe make a pitcher like this effective when we get to the playoffs. So I think that is, a lot of the motivation here. I think the Orioles have noticed that, we're kind of struggling in the playoffs when we get to the playoffs. And granted, especially this season, the pitching was not the problem. But who knows? Maybe this upcoming season, the pitching will be the problem, and as someone like Charlie Morton that goes out there and throws maybe a game 3 when we get to the playoffs, he could be really, really important and instrumental, theoretically, in helping facilitate the Orioles having better playoff performances going forward into the future. So I do think that probably without Charlie Morton's playoff experience, it's questionable whether we're going to see this deal in this way. I think the Orioles were probably looking for a regular season starting pitcher similar to Charlie Morton, uh, hence why the Orioles signed Sagano. But even beyond him, I think that there are possibilities as to like thinking about the playoffs as to why the Orioles went with Charlie Morton and probably paid a bit of a higher price, right? I mean, we're thinking about other veterans the Orioles have signed in the past. Now, Charlie Morton is probably a step above someone like Jordan Lyles. But with that said, I think the Orioles were probably intentional about not just bringing in any veteran, but bringing in a veteran with playoff experience. $15 million a year for a guy who is 41. It's a little more expensive than you would normally think, but this is Charlie Morton. So I think that the Orioles are taking a little bit of a calculated risk. Granted, it's just a few $1 million from the perspective of Rubenstein and or Elias. But with that said, uh, hopefully, I think the Orioles are thinking that that few $1 million could have big potential for the Orioles when we get to the playoffs and to the postseason. So I think that is a big uh, influential um, variable as to why we are seeing this signing in particular, rather than some of the other veteran free agents that were available for the Orioles. I think the other important thing to notice, I think, about this signing, I think it's sort of a topic that has come up for the podcast recently, or historically, I should say. But just as this question of commitment from the perspective of Mike Elias. And I think it has more or less become clear that Mike Elias really, if given the preference, would not, does not prefer to sign long contracts and long extended contracts. The Orioles could have pursued, and maybe they still are, but could have pursued an ace for this rotation to really bolster this rotation. Uh, of course, most of the Oriole fans were thinking about the possibility of re-signing Burns, but even guys like Max Fried were available. Granted, someone like him might be out of the Orioles price range, not really out of the Orioles price range, but out of the price range in the sense that the Orioles just don't want to spend that amount of money. Not that they wouldn't be able to or couldn't afford to. So someone like Max Fried, but yeah, even someone like Burns as well. I think the Orioles are hesitant, and Mike Elias has demonstrated he's hesitant to sign a big extension or a big contract with players, probably given the uncertainty around signing one player, sort of putting uh, all your energy and all your resources into one player that could, will probably hit most of the time if you're giving them that much money and you feel that confident in them, but also has a possibility of missing, not even poor performance, but getting hurt, etc. And I think it's clear that Elias would rather, divide resources sort of amongst various players rather than commit a lot of resources to one player. I think there's also, I think, so I think that's part of it. I think that, there is this thing that Elias prefers about keeping options and keeping availability open so that if one player doesn't do well or has a bad year or has a bad season, well, we've used the resources that we could have dedicated to one player now to four. So that if one of the four players doesn't do as well, or one of the players gets injured and is out during that time, and then another player just isn't quite living up to expectations, or Elias's expectations prior to the signing, well, in that situation, you still have two effective and functioning players that are still available and producing for the Orioles. So I think there is this sort of mentality that he doesn't really want to commit all these resources in one direction for one player. I think that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is there's this issue with commitment. So, especially with the Orioles being such a young, upcoming team, the Orioles can look at this starting rotation and see the bright spots in this starting rotation. You can see Grayson Rodriguez and you can see Kyle Bradish. And I think that there is this hope that Michael Elias has that one or both of these guys will develop into ace caliber pitchers. And if either of them do develop into this ace caliber pitcher that we're hoping for, now, granted, Bradish already sort of showed that he can be an ace. There's just a question about his long term health. But both of the, and Rodriguez has shown flashes. The question is health for him and consistency for him. But he has the capability of being an ace. So I think that from Elias's perspective, he's sort of thinking, why do I want to go sign a Corbin Burns or somebody else, a Max Fried, for this long extended contract that could backfire and that I might not even need, right? Because I might have an ace within this organization. I need to just wait a few years and I'll be able to see. So, as an alternative to going out and seeking an ace or even a number three that is going to be there for the next 3 years or something like that, Mike Elias sort of likes these stopgap solutions like a Charlie Morton, like a Zach Eflin. Eflin's going to be here one more year. The Orioles got him, they had him for a year and a half. Uh, he'll be here another year and a half, barring extension. So I think Michael Elias likes these sort of shorter term deals, these stopgap solutions, rather than to maximize flexibility, given the uncertainty of how certain prospects will turn out. Now, maybe if it is clear that Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish, let's just say they both have career ending injuries, maybe in a situation like that, Michael Elias would feel more comfortable going and signing a 28-year-old ace to a 7-year deal or something like that. Maybe that's possible. But with that said, I think it definitely seems like that would be his preference not to, especially if there is reason for him to believe that we might not need to do that because we might already have these pieces we need within the organization. So that's why I think that you're seeing signings like Sagano, signings like Charlie Morton, because I think that Elias is hesitant to get into a long-term contract and reduce the long-term flexibility of this Orioles rotation. So there's a lot of possibility with that. That might not be entirely accurate, but just me reading sort of how the Orioles have been operating, I think that's my guess. Like I said earlier, it's possible the Orioles aren't done. It is possible the Orioles are going for Jack Flaherty. I sort of feel like my feeling about that, given the rotation depth at this point that the Orioles have, I feel like they're not going to go for Jack Flaherty or they're not going to ultimately end up signing Jack Flaherty, even if they do make some offers to him or whatever. But with that said, I think I think that's what we're seeing from Elias is sort of this hesitance to place these permanent fixtures within the rotation for the long term. And I think that this applies to other positions and situations as well. You saw O'Neill sort of a somewhat shorter deal than what's possible. So I think that yeah, it's a combination of just not wanting to divide resources and also not wanting to overly commit and then sort of maybe have to find a way to trade a player because they lived up to expectations, Grayson Rodriguez or Kyle Bradish. Now, from Oriole fans' perspectives, we would say, well, you know, now we have three aces instead of one. That would be great, right? And it would be great if the Orioles had three aces rather than one. It's just not necessarily how Mike Elias would be viewing that situation. In that situation, he might sort of be thinking, well, in that, I wish that we hadn't overcommitted. I wish that instead of going and signing this starting pitcher to a long-term deal, I had gotten an upgrade at first base and dealt away, this player, and then spent some resources upgrading here, that sort of thing. Whereas I think most Oriole fans, if the Orioles went and signed an ace, and then Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish showed they were ace caliber, we'd be excited about that. And I think that's probably not the perspective that Mike Elias has thinking about the situation. So we will see what happens with Charlie Morton. I do think that it's going to end up being he will be a four. Maybe with injuries, he can get up to being a three. Maybe in the playoffs, he could be a three, maybe a two, but highly doubt that. And we'll see how he gets utilized when we do get around to hopefully, if the Orioles are good enough, making it to the playoffs. So we will see what happens. It is sort of exciting in a sense because Charlie Morton has had a very good career. This would have been a really exciting signing if we had done this, 4 years ago or something like that. I feel like my general tone and mentality about the situation I would have a much different outlook. But even with that said, the Orioles, I do think this is a signing that makes sense. I think this is a signing that the Orioles are comfortable with. There is not too much rocking of the boat in this situation. Mike Elias is going to be getting, I think, what he wants in a solid pitcher. And expand it, a pitcher that is providing more depth to the rotation, and then also someone who's going to eat innings and potentially can perform really well for the Orioles in the playoffs. So I think that's how Elias is thinking about it. 15 million is not going to break the Orioles budget. So I think they're thinking about it as, uh, it's $15 million. It's not a $3 million signing. You can definitely go lower AAVs than 15 million, that's for sure. But it's also not compromising in any sort of way the Orioles' long-term financial stability or ability to spend money on other players. So, also from the perspective of Charlie Morton, if you're making $15 million at your age 41 season, pretty good. And he could probably, you know, be excited about that and be excited about coming to pitch for a team that will likely be in the playoffs, etc. So hopefully it turns out to be a good deal on all sides and for all parties involved. So thank you so much for listening. Please follow the show, give us a 5-star rating, write us a review. We do have a YouTube channel that you can find us on. So go subscribe to us on YouTube. Feel free to comment on our YouTube videos with any of your thoughts. We are pretty good about responding. If you want to get in touch with the show, please email the show, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Feel free to follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at thewarehousepod. And thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.